What is the most difficult thing that I often hear from family members and care providers who are providing support for people with dementia? I don't know how to communicate. I don't know how to manage behavior. So I want to take a little bit of time and talk about a couple important principles when you're thinking about communicating with somebody with this disease or managing behaviors that are sometimes very difficult. So the first important thing that we need to talk about is remembering that this is a disease of the brain. And we come at this with our healthy brains, and we think, gosh, if I just explain it to them more, if I reason with them more, if I repeat it again, if I talk a little louder, perhaps they'll get it this time. Forgetting, of course, that we're talking about a disease that intellectually we understand the person is not able to remember. They don't have reasoning skills. They're not able to remember what you've just said to them, sometimes 30 seconds to the next. And although you intellectually say, I understand they have dementia, but then you talk to them as if the brain is healthy and functional, right? Because that's where we come from our own perspective. So I want to give you a little scenario, a little snippet I want you to think about. I want you to play Let's Imagine. So let's imagine that you are in a foreign country. You don't speak the language. You're driving at night and you find yourself at the dead end of a road and your car stalls. So there are signs all around, but you can't read them because you don't understand the language. Your phone is dead, the car is dead. You don't know where you are, and you can't read any of the signs to help you orient yourself as to where you need to go. You have two small children in the back seat of the car who are saying to you, but Mom, I'm hungry, and you promised, and you told me we were going to get McDonald's. What is your likely first response going to be? Are you going to turn around and say, you know, you're right, honey. As soon as I can figure out this really dangerous, scary situation, I'm going to get you a Happy Meal? Probably not. And why? Because the state that I just described to you, what are you feeling? Most all of you are probably feeling fear. Fear is an impulsive, immediate, protective reaction that happens in our brain even before our mind or the cognitive part of our brain tells us we should be afraid. In that scenario I just gave you, immediately what's probably happening to you is your heart rate's up, your blood pressure's up, your stomach is in a knot, your skin has goosebumps, you're starting to sweat, and your brain slows everything in time down so you can be laser focused on one thing and one thing only. Do I need to run? Do I need to fight? That is our primitive fight or flight reaction that the brain stimulates adrenaline and cortisol to say to your body, you need blood in your hands, you need blood in your feet. You don't need to be digesting food. You don't need to have any other things happening in the brain other than laser-focused problem solving, quick assessment that is, in my scenario I just gave you, now there is a man approaching your window. Your brain, with all that adrenaline and cortisol floating, has to determine, does this person mean me harm or are they here to help me? While this person's approaching, the children are now piping again, but I'm hungry. Your first reaction to them, if you're normal and you've got fear, is I suspect you're going to turn around and scream something like, stop talking, be quiet. You're going to yell, right? Because fear puts us in that place. We need you to shut up, be quiet. I can't think about that. My voice is getting louder because the adrenaline is pushing me because I am in a state of fear, right? Now this person's approaching the car. How am I going to know if I can trust this person because I'm desperate, or do I have to fight? Because he's talking, but I don't understand the language. I've now just given you the world of somebody with dementia. The environment is not familiar. I don't recognize the signs or the cues. I may or may not recognize you. You may have introduced yourself, or I may have seen you just 5 minutes ago, but you look like a whole new stranger all over again. I'm afraid. And when I'm afraid, I'm yelling. I want to push you away. I want to protect myself. It's fear. I'm trying to figure out what I have to do to protect myself. When you, as the care provider or the family member, are coming towards that person who's in that state, they are looking at you for all the same things that you are looking at that stranger approaching your window. How am I going to know? How do we know? If we don't understand the verbal, we go for the nonverbal, right? So I'm looking at your face. I'm looking if you have eye contact with me. Do you look friendly? Do you look mean? Are you approaching me rapid? Are you approaching me slow? Are your hands visible? Do you mean me harm because there's something behind your back? Are you reaching for me? Are you talking to me in a tone that says you're here to help or to comfort me? Those are important things that all of us as care providers have to remember. We need to use our verbal skills, talk less, and use our nonverbal skills more. Why? Because here again, if our verbal language means nothing, and many people can't even interpret what we're saying, it's what we're showing and what we're doing that is resonating with them. So it's really important that when we're trying to communicate with somebody with memory loss or Alzheimer's disease or other kinds of dementia, that we're approaching them with a mindful awareness of, what does my face look like? Maybe I have a headache, maybe I'm tired, maybe I'm in a hurry. But if that is what's all over my face, I'm tense. I certainly don't look friendly, I don't look welcoming, I might even look like I mean them harm. So we need to be taking deep breaths, taking good care of ourselves so we're not burned out, where it's written all over our face. When we approach somebody with dementia, it is important that we're paying attention to, how do I look? What's my tone? Am I smiling? Am I giving them a sense of comfort just in my being? In the way that I may be stroking their arm, in the soothing tone of my voice, in the eye contact that I'm maintaining, that I'm approaching them from the front and not from the sides, which can feel frightening and overwhelming, like, where did you come from? Little things that we sometimes forget about because we're in our own hurry, we're in our own mind, forgetting that what's happening each and every time we approach somebody with dementia, it's as if they're seeing us for the first time. That's most important. The second thing that we need to pay attention to is sometimes people will say to me, what do we do when somebody's yelling or they're screaming or they're trying to hit us? I say we have to always look at what we call the antecedent to the behavior. The antecedent means what came before. So before they started yelling, before they started banging on the table, what did we observe or notice about them just before that? So was Mrs. Jones sitting in her chair doing kind of one of these, and then all of a sudden we noticed she starts banging on the table? Maybe that was our cue that we missed, that she needs to use the bathroom. Or is Mr. Smith sitting in his chair and doing this when he's moving and grimacing? And then he starts screaming out and yelling. Our natural indication is to come up to Mr. Jones and go, why are you yelling? Stop yelling, Mr. Jones. It's okay. Why are you yelling? As if what? Mr. Jones should be able to say to you, well, let me explain this to you, honey. I'm yelling because my back is really uncomfortable. This chair is starting to hurt me. I think it's time for me to have my Tylenol, right? We expect him to react as if the brain is functioning normally by the very questions we're asking them. Instead, it's important to observe and be able to identify that maybe he's uncomfortable. Maybe if we gave him Tylenol before he sat in that chair before dinner, we would notice that the screaming and the yelling might stop. Maybe if we toileted Mrs. Smith every 2 hours, in the time period when we know that she's active and tends to start banging on the table and yelling out, does that change the behavior? It's trial and error. No one strategy or technique works all the time consistently with everybody. It's trial and error. But it's important for us to be thinking about there is a reason that somebody is engaging the behavior that they're engaging in, and it is our responsibility to identify what is that reason so we can be able to manage that. The other thing I think that is really important when it comes to behavior is we have to remember that Everybody has their own bias. We all have our own bias as well. And our residents, our patients, our loved ones, our family members have theirs as well. Remember, with Alzheimer's disease, the last thing to go is the long-term memory, because the long-term memory sits deep in the cortex of the brain and is the last thing, most protected area from the disease. So until somebody reaches really the end stages, there is still some long-term memory glimmering and peeking throughout. We want to be able to tap into that long-term memory. For the good, to use visual cues, reminders. If we had somebody who did a lot of woodworking, are we giving them opportunities to do things that the part of their brain that is overlearned they can still do? Somebody who baked her whole life, she doesn't have to be able to read a recipe or understand it. It's overlearned in the brain. The brain knows how to do that on automatic pilot. We want to tap into that long-term memory. But we also want to remember that the long-term memory also holds places where our tragedy and our trauma occurs. So working in facilities maybe with Holocaust survivors, we don't know what their trauma is. We don't know that what the disease has wiped away in their short-term memory might still sit in the long-term memory. And their reaction to you or to me, to the big, tall, black guy, to the short, white person, to the skinny, tall, Asian woman, there is a perception. We all have it. There's a reaction. There's a reminder. We need, as care providers, to be mindful that there's something about me that Mrs. Smith isn't comfortable with me taking her into the shower, but she's very comfortable with my colleague doing that. That we swap out, that we pay attention, that we know that we can't possibly ask her, what about me makes you uncomfortable or scares you? All we can do is observe the reaction that the person has to us. It's observation. And then being able to change our treatment plan, our care plan, based on our observations. And the last thing that I wanted to say is a wonderful strategy that we really have volumes and volumes of research on is the use of music. Music is probably one of the most therapeutic things we can offer people with dementia. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, because I've talked about the long-term memory, there are things that sit in our memory bank that we just know. We don't know how we know it, but we know it. The place in the brain that interprets music, experiences music, and can respond to music also sits very deep in the cortex of the brain. So maybe some of you have seen the popular story that was out in the news about 2 years ago with the gentleman who couldn't speak because of the loss of language with his disease. But if somebody sang something to him, he could sing a full sentence back. It's because the brain is an electrical organ. It's rhythmic. It fires in a rhythmic fashion that mirrors the tone and the beat of music. So music facilitates language, but it also facilitates mood states. And you know this yourself. You put certain music on in your car, it's either going to get you all jazzed up and revved up for a Friday night, or it's going to be a mellow tone that you notice as soon as that music goes on and the melody's a little slower and the tempo's a little reduced, I feel my mood going down. I mean, nobody goes in for a massage and somebody has heavy metal playing, right? There's a reason for that. So the same thing holds true with our residents with memory problems or dementia. We want to make sure that we're using music strategically in many of the things we're doing. Many years ago, I did a research study looking at having residents have iPod shuffles with playlists that were specific to the music or the genre that they've always liked their whole life. So we asked the family members, and they would tell us, you know, my dad was always a country music lover. My mom played the classical piano. And we made a playlist that was specific to the music that we knew that they loved. And then we had that applied to their lapel with earbuds so the person could listen, turn the volume up, and manage it independently if they could, or a care provider helping them. And we watched what would happen at periods of time. We all know about sundowning, the late afternoon time when people tend to get very, very restless or agitated or can start to hallucinate. If we use those iPods at that period of time, we measured what happened to agitation and restlessness or the need for pain medications or walking and wandering and pacing. And of course, not surprising, what we found was the use of the music was a valuable tool in calming agitation, improving the mood, improving appetite, reducing heart rate and blood pressure. So For me, it is a simple, easy strategy to use that anytime that you are having some difficult behavior you're trying to manage. Certainly we know that bathing and dressing and toileting are very intrusive clinical care that we have to provide, and often the time when you find residents, they're most argumentative, they're most combative, they're most disagreeable. The use of music when you're showering somebody, the use of music in a bathroom when you're trying to toilet, is a wonderful distraction, diversion, puts somebody in a more cooperative, relaxed state. Again, like I said before, not everything will work with every single resident or every single loved one, but any place that you can find an opportunity to use music strategically, not just let's put some music on in the dining room while everybody's eating and we'll call it therapeutic. Because what happens in a dining room? There's a lot of noise. Adding music to it might be just more confusion. That is a lot of stimulation for the brain to try to make sense of. But strategically using it with the earbuds where you're saying you're hearing nothing else but the music that you love is another wonderful tool or strategy to try to find ways to communicate with your loved one. And finally, I will add for you that simply because your loved one or the person you're providing care for has lost their ability to communicate with you, doesn't mean that each of the things that you are doing may or may not be touching them. Simply being in their presence can sometimes be a very therapeutic thing. Thank you very much.